I'm Ellen Brown, president of the Rotary Club of Harrisburg. We're part of an international community and humanitarian service organization comprised of 1.4 million members in over 44,000 clubs in more than 200 countries. Rotary leads the world in volunteer service. For more than 112 years, the Rotary Club of Harrisburg has organized impactful local service projects that changes lives and creates hope where it's needed most. Please join us at a Rotary luncheon at the Hilton, service on a Monday, or a Rotary alternate meeting to meet our members who are waiting to welcome you. You can find out more about us at hbgrotary.org. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We hope to welcome you as a member soon.
And good afternoon, everyone. I do want to start this introduction, and I am not the guest speaker, so I'll make it very quick. We have to thank Yvonne Hollins, because if it wasn't for Yvonne Hollins, we would not have Nikole Hollins-Sims today. And so we are so very grateful, Yvonne. A little trivia, Yvonne was Nikole's assistant principal when she attended CD East, and she still turned out really well. So that is wonderful. Anyway, I am here to introduce to you our speaker, and we are delighted to have her. She is an individual who worked for not one, not two, but three state superintendents, state secretaries of education. She was that good that each and every one of them kept her. She was the Pennsylvania Psychologist of the Year in 2021. And so if any of you are in need of therapy, she would be more than happy to stay afterwards, and she can work with you there. Many awards. Nikole has won many, many awards in education. She has become an educational consultant, speaks all over the country. And to think that she started her academic career at no other place than HAC. And if it wasn't for HAC, she wouldn't be where she is today. At least that's what she said. She is here to talk about positive school climate. And we know that probably for those of you who have children or grandchildren, that is a key topic these days. And so please join me in giving her a very warm Rotary welcome.
Okay, we can do a little better. Good afternoon. All right, you got to know I'm in education, so we got to hear from folks. I am so excited to have this opportunity to stand before you and really talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm sure to you as well. As we think of the children of our Commonwealth, how can we create spaces where they feel like they can thrive and go out into the world and become great? And so Ski was sort of joking when he said that I wouldn't be where I am without HAC, but I believe that. There is a lot of foundation that came from being a part of that community college and being able to experience it in my senior year of high school. And so when I think about my mom serving as my assistant principal, that opportunity probably would not have been afforded to me if I didn't have a leader like her who wanted to make sure that I had those type of experiences. And so I'm grateful for that. So that's where my Psychology 101 course took place, was at HAC. And I can recall it. I can remember the building I was in. And I'm sharing all of that to say that as students, when we were students, with the students that you currently have, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, a caregiver of any kind, you want them to have a memorable experience, that wherever they go, they can remember that kindergarten teacher, or they can remember the building that they were in and how it made them feel. And that's part of the work that I do, enhancing positive school climates. And so with that, I'm going to talk about this topic in a book that I wrote in 2022 called Creating Equitable Practices in PBIS. And so I'm going to use a lot of alphabet soup in education. We use a lot of letters and acronyms. So I'm going to do my best to unpack what those are, but also would ask that if you have questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me. I know there's decorum and protocol, but I'm the type of presenter that if something comes up and you go, wait, what was that? Please don't hesitate to do that. Okay, so setting the foundation. I never take it for granted that everyone has the same understanding about educationese as I do. Just like if I were to be with my husband and he does IT, Ski already hype me up to say an IT table is over here. And so my husband would be right at home at that table. And when he comes home and he tells me about his day, I'm like, okay, I have no idea what you're talking about. Content keeper, all of these things, cybersecurity. And I'm sure when I talk to him, it's very, very similar. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page as we start. So you may say PBIS, what exactly is that? It's positive behavior interventions and supports. And again, in education, we think in shapes as well. So we always have to have a diagram to describe what it is that we're trying to communicate. And if you take a look at that circular diagram, there are main components that we would want schools to leverage and use to create climates where students have a sense of what's called belonging. And I'll unpack that in a minute. But when we take a look at those circles, they intertwine and connect around systems, data, and practices. And you may say, okay, that sounds good, but in schools, what does that really translate into? And so when we take a look at these things, what we're hoping to do is from a 30,000-foot view, look at the system. How are we functioning every day? And for my business folks in the room, you're probably used to sitting at that 30,000-foot view where you have to assess the full landscape of what it is you're doing and whether or not what you're doing is making an impact. That's the system part. But what drives our system? Data. Whether that is anecdotal, qualitative data, or whether that is quantitative numbers data. In either case, we need to be looking at the data to get a story from the data to inform our system. And in a lot of schools, and I'm just being very transparent with all of you, we are data rich and information poor. What does that mean? We got a ton of data, but we don't always know what it means. We don't always have access to it. And we don't always take the next steps that we need to take for maybe fear of what the data is going to show. And so what we're trying to do in schools is demystify data as something that can be very beneficial to making good decisions. So once we do that, and we create systems that allow for us to do better, we then put practices into place. And in education, one thing that we know is that policy drives practice. So when you think about your local school boards and the policies they put forward, whatever those policies are, end up impacting and influencing the actual practices that happen in classrooms and how those systems are set up and structured. And if all of those things are interconnected and centered in this term called equity, the outcomes can be accessible and available. I heard someone say that a moment ago. Accessible and available to every learner. And that's the core goal. Now that term equity, for some of us, because it's sort of a buzzword that we're hearing all over when it relates to education, I also want to demystify that term for us too. When we talk about equity, we're not talking about creating a space where someone's taking from others, but rather leveling a playing field as much as possible. So I often joke when I share with others that my husband wears a size 12 shoe. He likes to wear Air Jordans. He still loves to wear Air Jordans like they just came out. And he sits on Saturdays and waits for those releases. Nevertheless, I have to pay attention to those things. But he wears a size 12. I don't wear a size 12. I wear a size 6.5. So if everyone in my family had a size 12 shoe, that would be an equal size shoe. And I would fall all over my house because that shoe doesn't fit me. I would need that 6.5 equitable size so that every person in my household has the right shoe size to get what they need and do what they need to do. That's what equity really means. And it's not just about one particular race, one particular gender, one particular fill in the blank. Equitable practices in education should be lifting up every learner. That's the goal. And so that's why that's centered at the core. But you may be hearing this thing, and I'm going to ask for a raising of hands, about mental health in young people. How many of you are hearing a lot about mental health needs? And yeah, it's always been an issue, but quite frankly, from a school psychologist perspective, the pandemic exacerbated a lot of mental health that we're seeing in our students. So imagine as a kindergartner, You experience the pandemic and school is shut down. And the first time you enter school again is as a third grader. So you've not experienced how to do the kindergarten, social skills, how to learn to share, how to learn to interact. All of those pieces are somewhat missing. And so we're dealing with navigating some of the ramifications of that. And now we're sitting here with students who should have had a graduation in 2020, and now in 2024 should be graduating college, but haven't had a full experience in high school to fully know what's next. And so all of these factors play a part. So when we talk about mental health, that's social, that's emotional, that's behavioral, and it's not just the absence of a psychological problem. Mental health really, or mental wellness really, is your ability to live, laugh, and love. Your ability to do all three of those things, especially as a child, is very, very paramount. And so creating these systems that I just talked about with positive behavior at the core highlights the value of acknowledging all of these mental wellness competencies that we want our young people to have when they go out into the real world and interface with folks like yourselves in your businesses, in whatever atmosphere you're operating in. So the why. Why do we have to make school climates better? I don't know about you, but I can remember in school, it was rare to hear about students getting suspended. It had to be something really, really bad to have a suspension or even an expulsion happen. Nowadays, it's the norm. Students are suspended at rates that are much higher than we ever experienced. And then when we couple that on top of certain groups of students, those numbers go up higher. So a student with a disability sometimes receives a suspension or expulsion at higher rates than those that do not have a disability. Students who are of color or of different genders are boys. Boys tend to get higher rates of suspensions than girls. When we do those types of things, when it's exclusionary, you see that in the short term, so in the classroom, they lose instructional time. Attendance goes down. There's a possibility of future discipline issues. But what's the bottom line for us? The long term. Involvement with law enforcement, incarceration, unemployment, underemployment, societal ills began as early as preschool. I'm probably going to shock you with this next statement. And if I don't shock you, then I'm going to check my pulse. We have students as young as 3 being expelled from preschool. We've even had an example where a 6-month-old was kicked out of preschool for pulling the hair of the teacher. Now, a 6-month-old pulls at everything, right? But these are the types of environments that are created. Now, I'm not here to say we shouldn't provide consequences, that there aren't, legitimate consequences that should happen as a result of behavior. But one thing that I have learned in my work is that the term discipline means to teach, not to punish. So when we suspend students, Ski, my mom, any educator will know, some students go, I'm going to do something so that I can get sent home, because then I can play PlayStation all day. I can do the things that I really want to do because I don't even like being here to begin with. And at the core, how can we make our systems better where they want to be in our midst? I've already mentioned this, but just to highlight that disproportionality, that's the way of describing that if an outcome is either overrepresented or underrepresented, that there are definite consequences to that overrepresentation or underrepresentation. So things like gender, socioeconomic status, race, ability status, I'm going through the whole list, and every one of us shows up with at least one of those identities. And that's why when I talk about being equitable, I'm not just talking about people that look like me. We all show up with some of these things. And so as I make these connections between connecting equity, inclusion, and belonging, again, terms that you hear a lot and they become buzzy, I want us to put people to what I'm describing, students to what I'm describing, and acknowledge that how I see this is almost like a cake. The first layer of the cake is status quo. where we just continue to do the same thing over and over again and expect some different results, which we never see, right? We want to layer on this first foundational layer of the cake is equity. So that's going back to the shoe size argument, right? Giving students what they need to be successful. On top of that layer, we need inclusion. So creating inclusive communities where students can have dialogue, where adults can have dialogue. So I'll share a brief example. There's a school district out in the eastern part of the state, and they created a student team to start to help to improve the climate. And that student team was meeting regularly. And when they met, a few of them said, I feel like when we meet, we're talking in a vacuum. We all believe the same thing. We all think the same way. And I'll just be honest with all of you. They said, we tend to lean more liberal. Where are the conservative voices? If we're truly going to be a team that's about everybody, we should be hearing from those voices as well and having those good dialogues to help us get better together. That's what we talk about when we say inclusion or an inclusive community. And at the ultimate goal, where the top tier of the cake is to get to a place called belonging. And that's where people feel like they have a place, that they have a voice, that they can show up authentically. That's the goal that we want for every child. There's such a thing called belonging uncertainty. So let's say I walked into this room today, not knowing many of you. And let's say Dr. Ski said to me, let's say he invited me and he says, Nikole, just come as you are. However you want to show up, you can come. And I show up in a full-length ball gown, which that's not a shock if I were to do that. However, many of you would be looking at each other like, what's up with her? Why does she have that on? Didn't she get the memo, the rules of engagement, the terms of engagement? And I begin to self-question and go, maybe I didn't get the memo and now I want to leave because I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel valued in the space. That's belonging uncertainty. And unfortunately, a lot of our students walk into school every day with that feeling that they don't belong there, that lack of connection. And so I want to take a flip on the ABCs. One thing we know that the bottom line is for us as business people is how do we get functioning members of society to contribute to our economy, right? One thing they have to do is complete high school. A lot of them are not. And there are 3 indicators to tell us if we can predict whether or not they might just complete high school. And these are the ABCs. One is attendance. And believe it or not, as early as kindergarten, if attendance is a problem, it can impact that entire educational trajectory. Behavior, I've mentioned already, expulsions, suspensions, time away from instruction. And then lastly, course performance. How many of you can recall back that English class, that math algebra class that gave you a hard time, maybe? Students that are getting D's and F's in those 2 classes over their 4-year period in high school, that predictability goes up way high for them to not complete. Those are the technical ABCs. The social emotional ones are the ones that you see over on the other side. Agency, belonging, and connectedness. Agency means I have a voice. I can speak up and advocate for myself. Belonging means I feel safe to do that. And connectedness means I know others feel that too, and we're developing a network of advocates, a network of change makers. But in order to do all of that, it sounds easy, it's not, especially as an educator when you have 30 kids in front of you that are all different, that you gotta have different shoe sizes for every one of them. You need a framework. So you got to have things that make your life a little bit more seamless, that put things in a nice box, if you will, so that you can organize yourselves better. So the framework of a house, the framework of a bookshelf, the framework of even having a socket to plug things in, because if you don't, and I hate to say this, I'm going to say it kind of soft so that the Secretary of Ed down the hall doesn't hear me. This is what schools are dealing with right now. That's what it feels like. There's no structure. We don't know what to do. We're struggling. But there are things that can be helpful. And so PBIS is one of those things. And I'm not here to sell PBIS to anybody, because what I've had to help folks understand is that PBIS is not a program. It's not something you buy. It's creating that structure, that infrastructure, and creating a space where educators can put their practices in an organized way and feel less overwhelmed. There's plenty of evidence-based and research behind PBIS. I won't belabor and read all of it, but we see improved student outcomes. We see reduced exclusionary discipline, which was that key piece about expulsion and suspension, and then teacher outcomes, because what I forgot to mention, I've been really student focused in this. If our teachers aren't whole, it's the oxygen mask analogy. If they don't have on their oxygen mask, they're no good to those 30 kids in front of them. So part of my role as a consultant is to help give them tools and strategies to secure that oxygen mask. And I probably am telling you something you already know. Pennsylvania is in a significant teacher shortage crisis. Let me repeat that. Pennsylvania is in a significant teacher shortage crisis. And if we don't get more teachers to even go to college to become teachers, where will our educational system be? How will we produce the next you if we don't have those educators? We gotta make our systems better in order for educators to want to be a part of the work. And so, as I start to wrap up my time, I wanna offer some seeds for growth. Now, I just want you, as people that live in your communities, that are a part of your educational community, whether you serve on a school board, whether you don't, whether you're a parent, a caregiver, being able to know, what is my school doing to create these more positive systems for my student or for students like them? There are a couple things to keep in mind. One, from a disciplinary standpoint, are certain groups of students receiving that suspension expulsion at higher rates than others? And if so, why? Access. Can certain students access supports that others can't? Let's think of extracurricular activities and the ability for some families to pick their student up late, right? Because their jobs allow for flexibility. Other families don't have that same flexibility. And so access becomes limited because of that. Opportunities. Let's think about advanced placement courses. For some of us, that was easy. I could get an advanced placement course. I could go to HAC my senior year because I had an advocate that made sure that happened for me. Not every student has that. So how do we create systems where it's possible? And then the outcomes. This is just an example. As we think about the students that are evaluated and determined, which is my role as a school psychologist, determining if they're eligible for special education or for gifted placement, are we over-identifying? Are we under-identifying? Questions that all speak to the value of creating climates where students can be successful. And so that was a breeze through. If I had you for a day, I would take you on a bigger journey. But I did just want to introduce these concepts to you and just be clear that the work that I'm currently doing is liberating in a lot of ways because I can do it my way. I feel like Frank Sinatra, I want to sing, but I won't. But that's liberating because I know what schools need from the experiences that I've been able to have, and I know what's at stake. And so I ask all of you to do this with me, and that's to dream out loud. We have the potential to influence these systems in ways that we've never had before. We all thought that after the pandemic, education would be reimagined, and we have yet to get there. So it's still possible, but we have to be committed to do it. So I want to thank this Rotary for the opportunity. I am a new member of the Colonial Park Rotary, very recent. The Paul Harris, see, I'm glad she's my publicist. So again, thank you for your time, and I'm very happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you so much. Enjoyed the presentation. Just a little background. I'm married to a teacher. My mother-in-law's a teacher. My sister's a teacher.
You get it.
And I have a daughter who's going into education right now.
Yes.
So The question, the theme that I keep hearing from all of these wonderful ladies in my life is that when they entered into education, the idealism of treating every student equally was at the top of their mind. There are inputs that are not equal, that the school system can't solve.
Yes, sir.
So the family, the preparation that a student provide, it's the preparation that the family and the home provides, reading materials, reading at night, field trips, you know, all of those things, magazines, all of those things. How does your work and evidence-based around the classroom, and then how does the lack of family structure hurt your outcomes?
Very great question. So part of what I try to help educators understand, and the ladies that you're speaking to are speaking their truth, and it's valid truth, and it's reality. What I find with a lot of our work is that we can get waylaid by a lot of things that are outside of our locus of control. And so when I'm talking to teachers or I'm talking to staff, I'll say, okay, let's make a list. Let's just get it all out there. What are the things that we can control in our role? What are the things that are outside of our control? And then they begin listing the things you mentioned, the family, the community they're in, lack of healthy food, and they list all of them. What can we influence? So then we do that other piece of the exercise, and I'm speaking from my consulting part of it. And then we start saying, where can I make legitimate connections? So if the family is a barrier, how can I create an on-ramp to exchange some engagement with that family, to talk to them about what their experience is like, what I can do to support them in that experience. And some families are going to be very, I don't want you to cross that threshold, but at least the attempt has been made. And then once you know that, you can focus more on what you can do in the contents of that school rather than trying so hard to influence the family. I'm also a big proponent of parent training. And so for schools to create atmospheres where maybe teachers aren't present, but you bring in outside YMCA, other agencies, come in and do that parent training and provide them with some of that input and some of that background, because some of them didn't get it. So it's a generational piece that I think sometimes rears its head that can be a lot for a teacher to take on by themselves. So you need a full system to surround that work. That's a great question. Yes.
Thank you for the program. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate what you're doing. I wonder, do you ever have the opportunity to bring not only the teachers together, but perhaps the administration, perhaps even school board members? Yes. Because outside of your structure, there's part of the system which exists in the school board that totally impacts that internal structure. So how, I guess for a question in there, what is the appetite from local school boards to be involved in this type of a conversation with teachers and families and students?
Yes, great question. So yes to everything. Yes, administrators, that part is a part of my work. Yes to school boards. I will say though that in our state, because we have 501 school districts, we are all local control. So for those that aren't aware of that, so when people say, why isn't PDE telling them to do, it's because their school board is the anchor and the leader that makes those decisions. So yes, school boards need to be a part of this conversation. The Pennsylvania School Boards Association offers trainings to school boards. So sometimes that part of it gets handled by them. And then I'm more at the educational district level or building level and supporting a faculty that way. Now, as it relates to the other part of your question on the appetite, it's twofold because my work kind of overlaps in a lot of ways. The positive behavior part that I went over, the mental health part, huge appetite across the Commonwealth. The equity part, inclusion, belonging part has done this. And it consistently does this. And it's based on, which I'm sure isn't news to any of you, fires. And I mean that in a very different sense, but let's say an event happens that makes national news. Sir, CD today. I'll probably get called. So it just varies depending on the needs. What I would love is if there would be a more proactive approach. So really, if those same school districts would reach out and get the positive behavior stuff, we may be able to prevent some of those explosive incidents that we see happen. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So there is a well-organized movement in Pennsylvania and across the nation, which pushes back on the importance of social emotional learning or PBIS in schools.
Yes.
We saw it recently in Cumberland Valley School District when the board voted against an anti-bullying assembly.
Mm-hmm.
How do we involve those people? How do we counter their arguments that there is no evidence, that it's all causality, that how do we counter that? As you can tell, I feel pretty strongly about it.
As you should. And again, I don't work for the state anymore, so I can say what I want to say now, which is nice. It's a big question that I wish I had a magic wand to answer. What I've learned in the work that I've done in Harrisburg School District in particular, and I'll share a brief story. When I was working at Roland Academy, and this is different than what we're describing, but I'm speaking to the power of watching people shift their thinking. I was at a school that was considered the worst school in the district. No teacher wanted to work there. Students hated being in that building. I think they might still hate being in that building. It's not a very conducive school building. We brought in PBIS. And I can tell you that the first day I trained on it, because I was asked to be an internal coach as a school psychologist, the union president stood up in the faculty meeting and said, "We've tried this already," turned her back to me. And I could have been defeated at that moment and said, this is someone with big power and influence in this building. And so no one's going to try to do what I'm suggesting. But over time, we piloted this with a grade level here, a teacher here, and people started saying, oh, this thing really is working. And we started to see a decrease in our suspensions. And we bought shirts that said rock and rollin', and people wanted them. And there was a pride about it. And so what I learned in that, and when I'm bringing it full circle, a colleague of mine, Dr. Charles Barrett, who's a school psych in Virginia, he said, focus on the fence. Like, what do you mean? You have people that sit on the fence, that just sit and wait to watch and see if it'll work. And then you have people on the other side of the fence that will never, ever go along with what you're going to do. You got to let them go. And you got to focus on the fence because you have the power to quite possibly bring them to the side that is on the side of kids. And so I say that to say, I wish I had an easy answer that we could just make people shift, but they need to see proof in pudding sometimes. And I think, could be wrong, but I think that's why that decision got turned over, because enough people spoke up and said, this isn't about that. It's about students being bullied and how can we make these systems better? So I think if focusing on the fence is all we take away from it, then that's what I'm going to do. And I hope others do it too. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question to Una's question about receptiveness.
Yes.
Many people in here know that I have a son that has special needs. He has autism. We had a challenging situation at the beginning of this school year where he was in private education, and then we moved him to public education, which has been going much more smoothly.
Good.
You're consulting, how receptive have private schools been to PBIS and this sort of, I also sit on a school board for a special needs school.
Oh, wow, cool.
She's also HACRED.
Oh, well, there's that. There's that. So I can honestly say that private schools have been open, and sometimes more open, believe it or not, to this opportunity to talk about how to make their structures better. What I find is that the work that I've done, PBIS is seen as a public school thing. It has that connotation, but there are a lot of private schools who have taken advantage, whether it's teachers who have come from public and now private and saying, this thing works. So I'll share an example again. My child goes to Harrisburg Christian School. And when I walked in and did the tour, I'm seeing signs that say, be prepared, be respectful. This is PBIS stuff. You want to see that in your building. And I'm like, this is private school. And they said, but we know that stuff works. And I said, okay, he's coming here. Like, it was a done deal at that point. But my point is to say that private schools have actually really benefited because, one, they have a little bit more autonomy in how they can create those structures. They also can say what they don't like, what they do like, and we can tailor it to fit whatever. So in his case, Christian school, they embedded Bible verses in that be ready, be respectful. So again, it's possible. And I think a big opportunity to influence there. Yeah.
I'm curious. Well, I don't know how to work this, but anyway, you can hear my voice. I'm just curious if you've had an opportunity to bring students together and to hear what they have to say and what their concerns are.
Oh, yes. So one of the things that I do when I'm training is to tell educators the value of what's called student voice, agency, and expression. Because what I've learned is that when we don't do things with students, they will not believe in it. And the likelihood of it actually having any real impact goes down significantly. So back to Roland, middle school, I decided because some students have what's called an intervention to help them socially, I wanted to do an ice cream social for them because they earned their percentage. And so I scheduled it, I got the ice cream and not one showed up. And I wondered why not? And so I had a kid, my mom remembers this. I had a student that I could go and ask and who would be honest. And that student said, Miss Hollins, that was stupid. All we wanted to do was go have recess and you wanted ice cream. And so at that moment, I realized I had it all wrong because I thought I knew what they wanted. And I needed to have that opportunity to actually listen. So when I consult with school districts, what I say to them is you need to have what's called a listening session where you literally don't say anything adult. All you do is pose the question, collect the notes and the feedback that they're giving, and then put that into action. Because the worst thing, and you all can attest to this, the worst thing is to be told we're listening to you and then they don't do anything that you said. So it's valuable to hold those listening sessions. Same thing, and I'm going back to the gentleman here from YMCA. Family listening sessions are pivotal too. You can do both and get a lot of great information.